We've got some new tech for the channel. We now have. Are we going live? Yes, we are live. Cool. So we've got some new tech for the channel. We've got the microphone. So, hello there, Jordan. So a lot of interesting things have happened. Obviously overnight. Obviously in the cricket, Jofra Archer getting 6 wickets, England having a batting collapse, Australia having a batting collapse. So the third test looking very likely to be a classic and an entertaining one. And in ice hockey, as you can see, I'm wearing my Washington Capitals jersey because Evgeny Kuznetsov has been banned by the IIHF for cocaine use. People have been saying I should get a green screen, but I do not have the space. I just don't have the space. I do not have the space where I'm currently living. And unfortunately, I have to make do with what I've got. It cost me nearly 50 quid for the microphone today. I'm lucky that I'm off work at the moment and I can do a few bits and pieces, but it's expensive. It's not as cheap as people realize, and I just don't have the space. Would I like to have a green screen? Nah. I like doing how I do it. I could put the whiteboard up to hide the sunlight, but it is what it is. But back to what I was saying. Evgeny Kuznetsov. So if you are not an NHL fan, he plays for the Washington Capitals. Obviously, he's a Russian. He got bronze medal in the World Championships in Slovakia in May this year, and he failed a doping test. Now, I've just done a video on that, and it's interesting because he didn't even want to have a B sample, and I don't think it's required for recreational drug use either under the WADA code. He's had issues and he's been linked to drug use before. There's a famous hushed up video of him that's circulating the internet where he's seen with suspicious white powder and some women who aren't his wife in a hotel room in Las Vegas after the Capitals had played a game against the Vegas Golden Knights last season. So this is not a new thing, but this failed test at the World Championships highlights an issue that is a big thing in professional sport outside of the Olympics. We've seen a lot of professional like football players, rugby league players, ice hockey players fall afoul of recreational drug use and getting caught. And the punishments have varied because it depends who catches them. What has been revealed is that the NHL testing policy is once in preseason in the training camp, which is the preseason, and once in the regular season, which is compulsory. And then they have random drugs tests throughout the year. So you don't get tested after every game. To be fair, there are a lot of games being played, and that would be a lot of testing and man hours to do so. But that means that outside of the compulsory training camp and one regular season testing, you may not be tested again for 12 months. So there is an issue with the testing policy that the NHL has. Now, he was caught at a World Championships, which means WADA, which means everyone is regularly tested. It's going to be interesting to see what the Washington Capitals do. It's going to be interesting to see what the NHL do. And it's going to be interesting if he appeals his punishment. Now, on the football side of things, obviously, Bury have until midnight tonight to find a solution to their issues. Otherwise, the EFL may throw them out the Football League. And that will create a domino effect. Absolutely will create a domino effect. Other clubs will be impacted by what happens to Bury. They will be. I have no doubt on that. I fear that Bury will go out of business. It's not just get thrown out of the Football League, it is to go out of business altogether. And we don't know if a buyer is going to be found or a financial solution is going to be found. It's been an ongoing issue for a while. The EFL and the FA, and to a certain extent the Premier League, have failed in their governance of the game. I discussed this last night, and I discussed it in the videos the other day. There have been many failings by the EFL. If they had implemented the fit and proper persons test, Steve Dale would not be allowed to buy the club. And if they also enforced the financial fair play rules, the club wouldn't be in the debt situation it is now because it's been forced to live within its means. So there are a lot of questions to be asked. You have said before that you follow Blackpool and Rangers. There are a lot of questions to be asked about governance of football at this time. A lot of questions, massive amount of questions. They're not going away. These are serious questions that the EFL and the FA need to answer. The Premier League as well. They allowed Portsmouth to get into that situation about 10 years ago. Uh, the the issues with Blackpool and Bolton are different about why they're in the same situation now financially. They're both up against the wall. They're both been docked points. They're both at the bottom of League Two. Bolton could face punishment, obviously, for not fulfilling their fixture against Doncaster Rovers because of welfare concerns of their young players. And again, that falls on the EFL. The EFL have basically said, yeah, your squad's okay to compete. And yeah, there are a lot of clubs that have bad owners, not just in the Championship, not just in League One. There are a lot of issues in football, not just in England or Scotland. We could discuss Rangers, we can discuss Blackpool if you want. There are issues with governance, and they're not going away. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I don't know where to put my finger on this, but if the rules that they have in place are properly implemented, many clubs wouldn't be in the state they're in. It would actually control wages more and control transfers, because that is something else that is seriously out of control, is player wages, untransparent agency, so that the agents, there's no transparency there. And transfers are out of control as well. I think there's a lot of things that football needs to get under control, and I fear that we may be 10, 15 years too late. I think the damage has been done. I think the position football finds itself in now was avoidable. And I've discussed the pros of having a salary cap in place over the system we currently have. And it's an interesting one. Casey, yeah, I understand. I had some friends at school who are in the Southampton and Reading academies for football and rugby union. We had a few in Saracens, Wasps, and Harlequins and London Irish when I was at school. But there are concerns with the governance of football in the world game, not just in the UK. It's a much wider thing. And they're not. And these questions aren't going away. Other sports have either a salary cap or a spending cap in place, like some kind of salary spending cap in place, and it makes for a more even, fair league. It makes for a more balanced, competitive league structure, and I think football should consider some kind of salary spending cap system. That is different from financial fair play, because financial fair play clearly isn't working. Some clubs have more money than others, so to do it on a percentage would still be an unbalancing. I think we have to look at seriously reforming how football is governed at the moment, because all we're seeing is serious problems with governance, and we have done for quite some time. And the fact that Bury have had these games suspended, how are they meant to get out the financial black hole they're in if they're not allowed to play games which can earn the club money? Even if they're losing those games and losing 6-0 every time, they can still earn money to pay off the debts. It's seen that the EFL kept suspending games. Bolton's case, they are going to be investigated over not playing the game against Doncaster Rovers. And I think Bury are looking likely to be thrown out the Football League and go bust completely. There will be a knock-on effect. It has happened before. It's happened with Aldershot and Maidstone in the early 90s, where they basically ran out of money. And the last time a club was actually kicked out of the Football League for financial irregularities was in the 60s. So there is precedent, but it's been a very, very long time. And for many football fans, not in their lifetime. It's going to be interesting to see where, if there is pressure on the FA, the EFL, and the Premier League to reform their governance and the rules that are in place. Absolutely. There's going to be a lot of pressure. There's already a lot of anger online. If you look at social media, if you look at what's been posted and the anger directed towards the EFL in particular, and the FA to a certain extent, you can understand why there's the anger there. And it's not going away. Fans are angrily pointing the finger at the poor governance that has been in place for a long time. And I'm going to have to change the angle of how we're seeing. Yes, well, ice hockey is an interesting one. There is no promotion relegation between the two tiers. I think that works very, very well. You have to live within your means. We've seen the Edinburgh Capitals, for example, go out of business. We've seen the Milton Keynes Lightning overextend themselves in the Elite League and have to drop down a level. We've seen the Invicta Dynamos, Milton Keynes Thunder, have to drop down a level because they overextended themselves. I think sustainability is a must. And then if you can make a profit and become more profitable, absolutely do so. But you have to be sustainable in the first place. You cannot have a league in place. I'm going to have to change the angle of screen because the glare is annoying me and it must be annoying the hell out of you guys. There we go. Now there's less glare. Now we can... There we go. So, yes, absolutely. I understand why the EIHL do that. I completely do. I understand why the National League do it as well. I think in the past, the sport of ice hockey in the UK has overextended itself, and teams have gone out of business. And I've done a history video last year on the history of British ice hockey, and yes, a lot of teams did go out of business, and it was unfortunate, and it damaged the reputation of the sport and damaged the growth of the sport for nearly 20 years. Now we've had some positivity from the national team. We've had some positivity with player development. Players now getting drafted by the NHL. Whether Liam Kirk plays in the NHL or not is another thing. But it'd be interesting to follow his career development over the next couple of years. And I wouldn't be surprised if more British players go into not only the NHL draft, but also the AHL draft, because there's a second draft as well. So it will be interesting to see the future of British ice hockey. But yes, absolutely, it is positive that they are trying to make the sport of ice hockey more sustainable and therefore, give it longevity and the growth it needs. It needs a firm foundation, and clubs need to play at the level that is suitable for their finances. It is a shame our last season with teams struggling and having to crowdfund to survive. That shouldn't be the case. And I fear that professional football is going to start going down the same route. The money in the Premier League is not filtering down as it should to the lower levels. And the Premier League clubs will scout the best young players or the best talented players who've worked hard and buy them cheaply and then sell them on for more money. They scavenge the lower divisions for steals in the transfer market. They do. And a lot of the clubs in the lower leagues rely on the loan system, which is highly unfair as well, because those players can be recalled at any time by their parent club. But it is an interesting point that you raise about the National League and the Elite League here in the UK. There could be further restructuring with like affiliate kind of teams where a club in the National League is an affiliate to a club in the Elite League. We've seen the two Sheffield teams decide to come to that kind of agreement. It would be nice if that was more of a thing for every team in the Elite League and every team in the National League to have that affiliate status. I think that might help with player development. But I can see the Elite League expanding in the next five or so years. So I can see clubs in the National League taking that step up and growing the Elite League. I can see that. I can see the import rule change on how many overseas players you are allowed to have. And it will be interesting to see in the next few years where the sport in this country is and what level it is at. I can see it continually growing, because I look at other sports and the frustrations fans have with those other teams and other sports and how they're run and how inaccessible they are and the cost. And ice hockey is so much cheaper to go and watch. It is an expensive sport to get into. I will admit that. It does cost a lot for skating lessons, equipment, coaching time. But to actually, as a fan, go and watch, it's very accessible. It's nowhere near as expensive as football. It's far more accessible with the TV deal that the Elite League have with Premier Free Sports. I think they've done a very, very good job there with that TV deal. I really enjoyed watching some games last season. And millions of people watched those games, and the audience was growing week on week. I think they got that TV deal right. There's room for, obviously, growth. But at the same time, other sports have got the media deals wrong. And the backlash from fans has been that negative. The negative response with cricket going solely onto Sky and BT Sport. F1, negative response. MotoGP's had a negative response. The only sport that has actually continued to grow until recently was football. And now fans have basically said enough's enough. because there are so many failings with the FA, Premier League, and EFL with governance, it's starting to have that negative impact on those organisations, and fans are starting to, turn away from going to games and watching on TV. They really are getting frustrated. We're seeing a lot of fan protests, and it's something that shouldn't be the case. We were promised when Sky Sports came along and agreed the formation of the Premier League back in the early 90s, which is probably before any of you guys were alive or watching, no doubt, that it would benefit the game. We've only had two. England's only had two semi-final appearances at major championships since the Premier League was brought in. Once at Euro '96, host nation, and World Cup last year. It's taken that long. We've had that little success in international football. It's damning. Wow. I'm not. I don't know what it is with Scottish football lately, or English football with racism, but I think there's been an upturn in sectarian chanting and sectarian-based violence. Rangers is obviously Protestant. Legia Warsaw, Poland's a highly Catholic country. I think it's stunning to me that in 2019 we're still having this conversation. It's not 1969. It's not the Troubles in Northern Ireland anymore. This is depressing. But Rangers have a history of poor fan behaviour. Same with Celtic. I'm not going to do a video and give that any more airtime on it. I think Rangers and Celtic, Hearts and Hibs. I think Scottish football in general. It's not just the old firm. It's every club has this issue. It's not going away. I work with a Hibs fan, and I'm quite open with my dislike of sectarianism. My father served in Northern Ireland with the army 6 times. He lost friends out there, and there were some days where on the army base we would have bomb threats when we were living in Germany from either the IRA, even the Ulster loyalists, and then the Turkish PPK terrorist organisation who were Kurds. They would leave pipe bombs. I cannot stand sectarianism. I cannot stand racism. But it's still there, and in 2019 it shouldn't be a thing, but it is. But Rangers and the Polish clubs also have a lot of fan trouble. I don't think it's just a Rangers thing. I think it's actually a Europe-wide thing. But they like pointing the finger at the British clubs because apparently we have the disease of hooligan issues. But if you look at Europe, they're just as bad, if not worse. We'll see what happens if Rangers appeal that, or if there's further stadium closures or behind closed doors. We've seen it before in Europe, but the fines are pathetic, to say the least. And I just say kick the clubs out. Kick the clubs out of the competition. That hurts them more financially than the pathetic fines. I mean, Nicholas Bentner got fined more for his Paddy Power hot pants underneath his shorts in Euro 2012 than some clubs get for the racist abuse. So, free sports, yes, yeah, I do like free sports. It does show some good quality sport from all around the world. Very big on the ice hockey, but they do show the MLS. They do show the Portuguese League. They've shown Africa Cup of Nations, I believe. Free Sports and Premier Sports Network. I mean, I hate paying for subscription TV, but Free Sports have done a good bit of growth out of that network. They're a really good little channel, and they do some good quality broadcasting. Well, the MLS. I've seen a few MLS games this season, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed watching the MLS. While the quality level isn't as high as the European leagues, it's a very open style of football, very end-to-end style of football as well. There's a lot of mistakes in it, I will admit, but it's actually really entertaining because it's more open. You will have games that are end-to-end. The pace of the game is slightly slower, and I think it's more accessible because it's on Free Sports and Premier Sports. But Free Sports do show the MLS. I've actually enjoyed the MLS games that I've caught this season. I haven't caught loads, but I've caught enough to be impressed by what I see. And the crowds are pretty good, and the atmospheres are pretty good as well. What else have we got? Other questions? I do think UEFA are trying to make examples out of certain clubs. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think just if you've got a three-strike policy, a fine, play games behind closed doors and fine, or partial stadium closure, and then kick out a competition. I think there should be a three-level thing. So if the club has been found guilty of its fans exhibiting racist behaviour or crowd disturbance of any kind, fine the club. If it happens again in the same season, then you partially shut or behind closed doors match, partially shut the stadium behind closed doors, and then the third time you throw them out the competition in Europe. I think that might start turning some heads, and you might actually get some action from the various leagues and clubs concerned. Racism in I wouldn't say it's British hockey. Racism in ice hockey. There's a big issue in Canada at the moment of racism in the Quebec Junior League. That's been an ongoing thing for a couple of seasons. But I've never heard any racism at games that I've been to. But I think I've seen crowd trouble at ice hockey, but I've never heard any racist chanting. But I think ice hockey and all sports can do more. I also think football should talk to some other governing bodies about and other sports about why their fans are better behaved. For example, I think football could learn a lot from a lot of other sports such as cricket, ice hockey, rugby union, rugby league to a certain extent. I do think football in this country and maybe across Europe and across the world could look at other sports and discuss with them, various things to improve the fan experience for one, and a whole host of other issues such as VAR use, because other sports do use goal line tech or video refereeing tech far better and much more effectively. And yes, the governing bodies in sport should also work together. We do sort of see it in the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, but we need to see it more. I think football can learn a lot from other sports and vice versa, but football does have an issue with racism, sectarianism, and general violence of its fans. Well, they're not fans really in my eyes; they're just idiots. But the media will just keep reporting this stuff. The more the fans miss, it's a thing the media like. The media likes going after these kind of stories. I think we need to find a solution though to the sectarianism. We need to find a solution to the issues that we see daily with racism towards players. And I think one of the ways in which you can tackle it is if the players and the PFA went on strike. They're whining all the time about racism or abuse and missiles being thrown and homophobic and racist chanting or scummy chanting and threats to them online. Go on strike. You will suddenly see the attitude very quickly change because the clubs are losing money. The TV companies look stupid because they've got no games to show, and action will suddenly very quickly take place. They have a thing called the PFA. It's their trade union. They're not using it effectively. Instead of just doing some virtual signaling and saying, we're talking to Twitter, we're talking to Facebook, go on strike. So this is unfair working conditions. You don't get paid to go to work, be racially or homophobically or violently abused by people. Why should we? That, I think, is the way that you're going to get some action on racism and homophobia and the abuse that the players face online, is to go threaten strike action, or actually to go on strike. What else have we got? I think I've answered all those questions to do with the MLS and discipline and behaviour. Absolutely, football can learn more. Some clubs do make it interesting for their fans at half time. They do have the get your kid as a mascot kind of thing. Some halftime entertainment, some pre-match entertainment. Some fans don't like that. But I do think the fact that fans have to be segregated between home and away says enough. You need to know about the culture of the sport, and the abuse that players receive, be it from missiles from the stands or various chants, be it racist, sectarian, or anything else. Why are the players not going on strike? If they go on strike, the clubs lose money because games aren't getting played, and the TV companies look stupid because they've got no games to show, so they also take a hit. Action would happen very, very quickly if players did that. But I'm not just here to talk about football. I mean, the reason why I decided to go on this live stream is obviously in Washington Capitals, hence why I'm wearing my lovely Jaromir Jagr Capitals jersey. As you can see, Evgeny Kuznetsov has been banned by the IIHF for cocaine use. Now, he's not banned from the NHL, and this is what I find interesting. he's had issues with cocaine before. He's been linked. There's a video of Evgeny Kuznetsov online where he's in a Vegas hotel room with a suspicious white powder on the table and a woman on the bed who is not his wife. His excuse for being there is hilariously poor. This was last season. Now, he played the World Championships, and that's where he was caught by WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Authority. He's been given 4 years from all IIHF sanctioned events, so he won't be able to play at the Olympics if the NHL players are allowed to go to the Olympics again. And he will not be allowed to play at the World Championships until 2023. It'll be interesting to see what the NHL and the Washington Capitals do in response, because he's not failed a drugs test under the NHL's watch, but it's going to be interesting. Oh my God! Someone agreeing with Barry Hearn. Wow, that's. Are you sure you're well? I can't stand Barry Hearn. But no, I do think the football associations aren't prepared to tackle the issue properly. The Kick It Out campaign has got allegations of corruption within it. Lord Ousley, apparently there's some corruption there. The FA, not good enough. The SFA as well, not good enough. I think, yeah, the fact that football is just not doing enough. I think players need to go on strike, and attitudes will change then. No one goes to work to be abused, be it physically or verbally. I honestly feel that if this was to happen in another sport, players would walk off the field. And if players walk off the field now, they get sent off. I think that's wrong. I think we've seen it in Italian football where players have been racially abused and they've refused to play anymore. They've walked off the field and they've been suspended. This is the problem. This is the issue that the sport has is if the player says, I've had enough, I'm not prepared to take these monkey chants or bananas being thrown at me or whatever chanting, be it homophobic or racist, whatever it is. I've had enough. I'm walking off. They're seen as a coward by the media, and the footballing authority suspend them and give them technically a red card, which I think is wrong. That doesn't do anything to help the situation. I think they should support the players. And we had this debate last year about the World Cup in Russia. If there was any kind of racist abuse, what would Gareth Southgate do? He said, I would support the players in walking off the field, which means you forfeit the game. But I think this is an ongoing issue. But I think the only way to start getting progress is if the players as a group go on strike. And I bet you there are players that don't want to because either they're racist themselves or they just don't want to go on strike. But I think if all the black players decided to refuse to play and go on strike, there might be some action taken, because a fair percentage of players who play in English football are of black or Asian origin. If they were to refuse to play, that might start getting things going. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, football absolutely is not doing enough. Other sports seem to have much better public outreach. You just have to look on the Twitter feeds and on the news articles. Other sports have far greater community outreach projects, and they also give players awards, be it through their own teams or the league awards at end of season award ceremonies for their community outreach programs. The NHL is a league that does reward community outreach and encourages players to be involved with local charities, set up charities, or just generally get out and about in the community and meet people from the community that they play in. I think a lot of players do that out of the kindness of their heart as well. It's not like a photo grab. It's something that they feel very passionately about. I mean, yeah, I think absolutely. If you're being verbally abused and you walk off, or in some sports skate off or jog off or whatever you're doing, it's a difficult one. I was always told to stand up and not let them win. But I don't know. It doesn't help with some players how they celebrate goals and how they goad the already vile crowd into further abuse. Raheem Sterling did bring on a lot of his abuse himself by goading the opposition fans at Chelsea. Do I like Raheem Sterling? Nah. I think he is a bit of an arrogant little wanker, But at the same time, I do not accept that he had to stand through that. But some of his provocative celebrations didn't help. But at the same time, he shouldn't have to go through that. I think he hasn't helped himself with some of his actions, but at the same time, he shouldn't have to put up with it. It's 2019, for crying out loud. It's not 1969, 1979. With 40, 50 years down the line, this still should not continue in this day and age. But for some reason, it's on the rise again, and it's concerning. And I don't want to spend the entire live stream talking about racism in sport or abuse in sport. Football is lagging behind other sports in tackling these issues. Other sports have far better community outreach projects. And they have to be well advertised. They actively encourage their players to go out in the communities in which they're playing. They may not have been born in that community, they may not be from that country or that city, but they go out and they donate their money to the local church, the local charity, depending on their faith, their local place of worship. They volunteer, and it's not expected, but it's encouraged. I think that might encourage young kids to take a stand against bigotry in all its forms, be it sexism, homophobia. I think some sports, ice hockey, you can have some real funny celebrations. I mean, the storm surge in Carolina last season in the NHL was kind of fun. It was different. Some of the celebrations have been accused of being cocky or goading the opposition, and has led to a few issues. There's been a few players that have overstepped the mark with some of their celebrations, but I like some of the celebrations that ice hockey players do. But I think, basketball's a little bit high five. Let's just go on. American football, I think some of them are a bit offensive and do take it too far. Rugby, you just see the passion there in rugby. Absolutely, both league and union. They're physical sports, but I think that's a difficult one. That's a difficult, interesting one to answer. I do think some football celebrations are just like that. How much time on the training pitch have you spent celebrating this, practicing this? I remember Jemba used to do his cartwheels, and I think he injured himself once, and he was told never to do it ever again by Alex Ferguson, and he didn't. Look, there are definitely some. We won't mention his 21 game suspension, and hence why he's no longer with the team. He was binned off. I think ice hockey as a sport does have some issues, and a lot of it's to do with player welfare. And this is where, coming back to Kuznetsov failing his drugs test, he's had allegations against him in the past of drug use, recreational drug use. And it's going to be interesting to see how the NHL and the Washington Capitals in particular respond to his 4-year suspension. And it's going to be interesting to see if he appeals as well. But it'd be interesting to see what other questions you have, because we've discussed a lot about racism and issues with football and governance. And I would like to have some more positive discussions, because obviously we've got the Challenge Cup final tomorrow. And we've got the Rugby Union Internationals as the warm-up games to the World Cup. And there's some interesting things going on there. Oh, look, 21 games suspension is a lot less than his brother. His brother is a turd. Ryan Watt, I don't like him as a player, but as a person off the ice, he's a really interesting character. Having, seen him around the rinks for the last couple of years, he is an interesting character. And he's very, very, very... very open with the fans. You can, go right up and say, hi, how you doing? I like that about some players. But his disciplinary record is absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking, but not as bad as Frankie, eh? Oh, I've spilled water down me. Good old Frankie Bakalik getting 18 games for one incident, and technically having more games suspended in a season than Ryan Watt. I think what that shows is at all levels of ice hockey, be it the NHL all the way down to regional leagues, regional minor leagues in Europe, that there are drug problems and issues with recreational drug use. There's been several players in British ice hockey who have fallen afoul of the recreational drug use issues. What do I think of England last home away from Twickenham? What? That's a bit of an odd one. What do I think of England away from Twickenham? England Rugby Union with Eddie Jones. Ben Teo now going to Toulon, I think, is a strange one because that means they've only got one solid, powerful ball carrying centre in Tuilagi, and he's injury prone. And means there's going to be emphasis on Jonathan Joseph to do a lot of centre work, and he's had a lot of time out injured as well. It's an interesting one looking at the selection rules that England, the RFU, have in place, saying you have to play in England to be selected for the England national side. I think that's actually hindering England rather than helping them because there's some very, very good English players playing in France who would automatically get into any England side I would name. If I was to name an England side, I'll have the Armitage brothers and the Benjamin definitely in the England squad. And because they're playing in France, they're not allowed to be selected for England. Same with Ben Teo. He's going as a short-term cover during the World Cup to Toulon, and that looks like his Indian career over. I think England have issues. Discipline is a massive issue. Has been for years. It's got worse under Eddie Jones, not better. It's an interesting one. I think their win against Wales at Twickenham was really, really good. Their defeat against Wales, they were shocking. Wales weren't much better. I will admit that. I think that they could do things better, but it is what it is. Thoughts on the Bees Radio podcast being on Patreon? I think it should be on Podbean because that's more accessible. Patreon, you have to pay. And not everyone wants to do a monthly membership thing. Podbean, you don't have to be a monthly member. You can just watch or listen, depending on if it's a video podcast or just an audio podcast. I'm tempted to do a Podbean podcast. I've signed up for it. I just haven't used it. But they're branching out. It would have been better if they had live stream games to YouTube, for example, or done a more accessible. Patreon is not necessarily the best one to have it on, but it's a radio podcast. It would have been better if it was, live streamed. But it is what it is. I think they're branching out. They're trying to grow because they're limited with the media rights. The National League doesn't have media rights. It's a way for them to reach a wider audience outside of the Thames Valley. BBC Radio Berkshire used to have commentary on the games back in the day, about 10 years ago. They've stopped doing that. I don't understand why. It would be nice to see BBC Radio Berkshire actually having commentary on not just the Bracknell Bees, but also the Slough Jets as well. They used to do that about 10, 12 years ago. They stopped doing it. And I think that's a really bad decision because they had good coverage there. But, it's all about being able to reach a wider audience. It's going to be interesting to see, how many people actually decide to follow them on Patreon and where they go from there. I think other teams have done the live event where you buy the £5-10 or whatever it is, and you get to watch the whole game ad free and all the commentary with it because they don't have a TV deal like the Elite League do. Other teams put all their stuff on YouTube, so they could have a YouTube and obviously put it live on YouTube. It might be commentary free. It might have commentary, but I think other teams do it. They might go down that route. The Blackburn Hawks, no, they won't be in the Elite League. There's just Blackburn is one of them where it's a football town, and I think the Hawks haven't had the history and the following. They just don't have the fan base. Blackburn's a football town, much like Burnley, much like Accrington. That part of Lancashire is football and cricket, and rugby league is a secondary kind of thing behind that. They have been at a high level in the past, but there's the lack of fans and the lack of success is a big no-no. And the finances, who's going to finance it, and there's a lot of things to discuss there. I think talking about growing sports, you've got to you got to market it. You got to make it accessible. And Patreon, you got to pay to be a Patreon of a Patreon user. So that puts a lot of people off. This is why some people like me have YouTube. I tried Patreon. I looked at it and went, nah, don't like it. Not a fan. Could never really be satisfied with Patreon. I thought, nah, it's just not for me. And this was before I got back into work. So now I have a job, I have an income again. I'd rather earn money off YouTube, where I'm accessible to everyone, and you don't have to pay to watch me. Basically, I think that's why I enjoy YouTube, because it's accessible for all. Um, but it would be interesting to see if there was like the local BBC radio and the local commercial radio picked up commentary for uh, the hockey matches. BBC Radio Berkshire did used to cover Bracknell and uh, Slough. I think BBC Radio Wiltshire and Hampshire covered the Basingstoke and Swindon. It would be nice to see local BBC Radio start covering local ice hockey teams again. It would. Uh, the Blackburn Hawks, they've been around for a long, long time. Long time. They've been going years. But obviously, the restructuring of the leagues and the collapse of the EPIHL, you come into contact with teams you haven't seen before as a fan. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Hull, Peterborough and Bracknell do take that step up to the Elite League. I think the Elite League has to grow as a league. But we'll see what happens with the Elite League. They've always said they want a replacement for the Edinburgh Capitals. But now the Milton Keynes Lightning have dropped out. It makes it an even team league again, 2 5-team divisions or conferences or whatever you want to look at it. But it'll be interesting to see the direction British ice hockey takes going forward. I think talking about governance, it's not just league governance. You've also got to remember it's governance of the teams. It's how the ownership works. And Edinburgh just never really had a competitive side. Milton Keynes overextended themselves terribly. But we'll see what happens. I mean, the sport is growing, and with growth, you're going to have to expect the league to grow with it. Contemporary leagues are bigger, more teams in, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Elite League does expand. To join the league. It's a very north-based league. Guildford is the most southerly team. It would be nice to see some more teams in the south of the UK taking part in it, make it more of a national competition. But we'll see what happens in the years to come. And right now we've got to focus on this coming season, and then go from there. I think Hull will be the next team to join if they are to expand, and Peterborough and Bracknell might go there. I can see with the refurbishment of Bracknell Rink and the plans that Hull have in place and the meetings they had last year after the Edinburgh Capitals went out of business says to me that there is progress to be made in growth of the league. But we'll have to see what happens going forward over the next couple of years and see what discussions take place. It hasn't been called the Super League for nearly 20 years, so get with the program. Super League went out of business, I think, 2003. So Super League, gone out of business a long time ago. We did. There was a period where the EPIHL and the NIHL did have cup games against each other, but bearing in mind the EPIHL had a 4 import rule and the NIHL had a 2 import rule, so you had to drop 2 imports to play the games. But it is what it is. Right, what else are we talking about? But the Elite League and the National League, that would be insanity, absolute insanity. The difference in class, it would just be a mess. It just wouldn't work. On the rugby side of things, Super League. Super League in rugby league. Absolutely, I think the game needs to broaden its horizons. I've been saying that for years. There is issues with rugby league. I think it's governance. It is governance, and we discussed last night in the live stream about Cameron Smith's wife getting that diamond ring for $15,000 Australian dollars, and Uh, I I think the issue with Super League is they're very traditionalist in their look in rugby league in this country. Um, it's for some reason the RFL boards are very introverted in the sense that obviously at the beginning of this season they were going to charge £500,000 for the three non-English teams such as Catalan, Toulouse, and Toronto to take part in the Super League Challenge Cup, and they boycotted. They refused, and then because Catalan were the holders, it was very embarrassing for the Rugby Football League governing board, the RFL, when their cup holders were refusing to defend their title. It was really bad PR. It made the RFL look xenophobic and outdated. And, the RFL needs to work out there's a reason why it's losing money and to punish teams that are clearly going to bring something to the party. And especially with Toronto and Toulouse and Catalan, bring crowds as well and money. They're very three well-supported sides, two of which play outside the Super League. That would have been a massive shot in the arm for rugby league, massive shot. But to charge them £500,000, they were right in boycotting. They made a stand. They embarrassed the RFL, and the RFL backed down when it came to Catalan. But that's a precedent they've now set, is they're going to not charge the English clubs from participating in the Challenge Cup, but they're going to charge the non-English, the French and Canadian clubs to take part. That is wrong. You can't have one rule for one nationality and another rule for the other nationalities taking part in the Super League structure. That is wrong and harms the image of the game. But yeah, it would be nice to see more Super League teams in the southern half of England, absolutely. And in Wales, it would be nice to see growth in rugby league in the non-traditional areas to take on rugby union, because rugby union is a winter sport and rugby league is now a summer sport, so it's not going to be as many fixture clashes, and it will bring much needed revenue to stadium operators, because not every rugby union or rugby league team owns their own stadium. So to have like both codes playing in the same stadium would help with revenues and bring money in and bring investment in. And I can see it being a no-brainer for me. But the old boys club in the RFL and the old boys club in the RFU seem intent of killing each other's codes. They have done for years and continue to hate each other. And this is where the sports need to work together, not against each other, because at the end of the day, they're only harming their image than assisting their image. The import rule in ice hockey in the UK, we're going to see changes to that in the future. We are. We may see no imports in the National League Division 1 and Division 2, North and South, below the second tier in coming years. It might be only British trained players or EIHA. That's the English Ice Hockey Association trained players who may be overseas. But I think we are going to see further changes to the import rules that we have in place in British ice hockey, with the obviously economic and political changes that are taking place to do with Brexit. So we may see a lot of European players want to go back to Europe, and we may see like a work permit scheme put in place. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, the US and Canadian players will continue to come unchanged, but we may see changes to the import rule that also may affect the Elite League as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. At the moment, I don't see the governing body wanting to change the rules in that regard. But we may see changes in the coming years because of political and economic changes that the EU and the UK will be going through in the coming months. That may have a knock-on effect 2-3 years down the line. It depends what kind of agreement is signed between the two. That's going to be interesting if the input rules are correct and if they are making adjustments to them. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if he actually stays for the full 3 years of his contract. He might want to move on. The relationship may break down. He might want to move on. We'll see what happens. Contracts obviously are there to be honoured, but at the same time, we'll see. I think Swindon got very, very lucky with some of their players being trained in the UK, but being overseas. I do have some ideas for the other channel. I've bought a load of films. So I'll be doing some film and game reviews. I bought some Xbox games as well. I've been off work ill this last week or so, but so absolutely there will be some more content coming up in the days ahead over the bank holiday. Considering that we have our third heat wave of the summer. So yeah, there are going to be some new video reviews on films and video games. I haven't been on the channel for a while, but I also, in some economic news, I'll be doing some economic stuff and some more history related stuff to do with various bits and pieces and some famous people and places from history. So don't worry, there will be some content coming up there in the next days and weeks. I have to admit, I have neglected the second channel for a while, and that's my bad. But I've been focusing on this channel and of course, my job, which has been really keeping me busy the last 3-4 months. So, yes, I have a backlog of stuff to do. And of course, we will get around to making sure we put that content up. But yeah, back to the Swindon Wildcats. Yes, they did get lucky with Berberier, Costill and Hogg over the years. But we will see, what happens with the input rules and if they do change them. Forza 6, I haven't played Forza 6 in a long time. Not going to lie, I've really got bored of that. The Homefront Revolution, I have obviously bought that, I think, yesterday. I'm already halfway through the game. I will say this, I think it's a better version of Wolfenstein. And it's easier to play than Wolfenstein as well. I think while there are issues with the game and it's not a perfect game, I will review that when I actually finish it because I'm really getting to an interesting bit now. I'm not going to ruin it for anyone, but I have got to an interesting bit. Forza 6, I had that years. I don't really play it anymore. I've reached a point now where I've got bored of it. I think we could talk about esports, and this is something that I've been wanting to do a video on, but I haven't really found the right ideas about how to go about it. And esports and getting involved and how to be classed that, considering that this is a sports channel, and the importance of esports or the issues surrounding esports and professional sports that we currently have. We know that the NFL and NHL have had links with Fortnite. NHL players such as Patrick Laine, who plays for my team, the Jets of Winnipeg, he's admitted to having a Fortnite addiction, and that has affected his on-ice performance. And it appears that he's on his way out of Winnipeg. He might be on his way out of the NHL as well. Lots of issues surrounding, Fortnite, and is it? The microtransactions. Obviously, the Fortnite World Cup, several teenagers won some really big prize money at the Fortnite World Cup. Esports is a growing thing, and we're seeing some really big esports competitions now that are being streamed live on things like Twitch and are getting mainstream media attention. It will be interesting to see, the participation numbers for esports, because I could sign up and join an esports competition. I'll probably come last, but I could sign up. It's more accessible than sport. All you need is a games console, a games controller, a headset, and a large amount of Mountain Dew and a large amount of virginity to do it. And considering that I haven't had a relationship for quite some time, I think I fit the profile of a nerd. I have an Xbox. I have 2 headsets. I have a microphone. I'm live streaming. My video games collection is growing again, and I nearly bought the Crash Bandicoot Remastered Trilogy yesterday, so I'm really going back in time here. Esports, though, on a serious note, I might have to do a video on it. I know that Fortnite has teamed up with the NFL. Fortnite and esports have teamed up with various leagues and teams, and their players play in various competitions and have endorsed it. And endorsed Fortnite, for example, or even Call of Duty or FIFA or whatever it may be. And I think the NHL actually teamed up with EA Sports for the NHL EA games to have competitions in the off season. So yes, it is a topic of interest. So I might have to do a video on esports. If you want some video ideas, but I also want to hear what other questions you've got, because I had some really interesting questions last night on a variety of sports. I even got to mention the CFL, yes, Canadian Football League, which is the Canadian version of the NFL. So that's something that I need to, would like to have more questions on, because there are some really interesting sports leagues and sports that I don't think get the media attention they should, and maybe don't have the presence they should. And that's interesting. Some of the questions we had in last night's live stream were really, really interesting. We had some really interesting discussion points. I had a guy from Edmonton in Canada who had questions on a variety of sports, and it was really fun questions that he was throwing at me. Really interesting, really challenging on the cerebral matter, and it was a really interesting discussion. He was asking some really important questions about my views on certain things and discussions on certain players and of the Edmonton Oilers, and he also mentioned the Canadian Football League and the MLS and the NBA and the Toronto Raptors and some sports that I don't actually follow, like others, and certain teams that I may not be fans of. And it was interesting, having these questions, because I do think that certain leagues or certain teams or certain sports don't necessarily have the same media reach or the same media coverage that they should do. And chess is like any tabletop game. Chess, checkers, cribbage, any card game, they are things that are traditionally drinking games, ironically, and they were normally played by the upper classes. So when you see like an old chessboard from the medieval times or even Viking era, that was normally played by the ruling classes, the upper classes, the warrior class, the wealth class, the landed gentry. You will find many instances in historical records of the middle and upper classes, playing card games in coffee houses and tea shops. And men's clubs. Like when I say men's clubs, I mean gentlemen's clubs. And then you find dice games and things like cribbage taking place in what is now the pub, and basically an establishment where drink and merriment would take place. This is where darts and snooker come from. Well, technically, pool comes from snooker. Snooker was an officer's game in India. Carom board is another tabletop game which comes from India, which has been brought over to the around the world. And I love carom board, and it's a difficult one to describe, but it's basically like snooker on a square board with a hockey puck, basically, and a set of hockey pucks that you have to pop into the pockets. And similar to snooker, actually, it's a tabletop game that involves putting things in pockets by shooting and scoring, and it's an interesting game, very popular in the Indian subcontinent. Snooker, invented in India, but a lot of these games, such as the card games and cribbage and chess and checkers, originally, if you go back in time, the upper classes were the ones who had accessibility to these things. Whereas more of the basic gambling, such as craps and dice games, are played, and games of chance are played by the lower classes. So that's an interesting thing on looking at the history. I've got a book. I've got books on the history of card games and tabletop games and things like that. I've got several books lying around, which are really interesting reads as well, because some of these games have gone out of fashion. Some of these card games are no longer fashionable and no longer played. And if they are played, it's very niche. And a lot of the card games you see in casinos, such as Baccarat and Blackjack and things like that, again, originate from older card games that were very fashionable in the European nobility in the 16, 17, 18 centuries. So, yes, that's an interesting one. I would think esports is different in a sense that anyone can do it. You don't have money. You don't have to have money necessarily or be from a certain social class to take part. All you have to do is have a games console or accessibility to a games console, and be willing to play. My least favorite sports is a good one. There are some sports that I don't enjoy watching. Not to say that I don't think they don't deserve their credit where it's due. I'm not a fan of baseball and I'm not a fan of basketball, but I understand why people are. and I will, casually watch a baseball or basketball game. I will happily sit through um, baseball or basketball, while not necessarily being a massive fan of those sports. I will happily casually watch those sports, but I can't get as invested as I would in rugby league or ice hockey, for example. But there are some sports that I've fallen out of love with, and there are some sports that just don't interest me. I wouldn't say I hate sports, um, because let's think of the point of this channel is to discuss sport. It doesn't matter what the sport is, but I would say there are some sports that I'm enjoying less now than what I was 10, 15 years ago. Football for me is definitely I'm enjoying it less now. F1, I don't enjoy it as much. Formula E, I think, needs improvements. IndyCar really gone off IndyCar. That is just don't get me wrong. I like it in motorsport when there's crashes, thrills, spills, and overtakes. But IndyCar has some serious safety issues that need to be addressed because drivers keep getting injured and killed regularly. And what we saw at Pocono last weekend, shouldn't have happened. I think they really need to look at, is IndyCar and oval racing just not good anymore? They don't have the Halo safety device on the IndyCars that they do on the Formula E and the F1. So that's an interesting point of interest. But again, it comes down to accessibility as well. Accessibility also has a big bearing on what sports I like and don't like. Pirate games and things like that, sailor games. You will see dice games are games that are regularly played, such as craps with dice, regularly played by the armed forces. I'm not going to go just for sailors, but armed forces. The thing is, back obviously in the day when ships were made of wood, you couldn't have any lit flame because it would blow up. So most of the games that would be played on a sailing ship probably would be card games, much like on land. You might get some form of gambling, games of chance, such as which cup is the ball under. Dice. Dice was a big one. Checkers, and the thing is, 90% of the time in the armed forces, be it on land or on sea or in the air, you're not actually doing any combat. You are waiting for something to happen. You're waiting for orders. You're patrolling. You're actually doing very mundane things. So yeah, there were lots of things. Gambling, lots of gambling is a big thing. But on board a battleship, lit flame is exceptionally dangerous with lots of propellant and explosive. So you're more contained on a ship, and there's only so much money on a ship as well for a ship's pay. So you would have to invent games. Absolutely, I think the mess room, games are played. Shore leave, I think, is where a lot of games will be played. And again, most of the games will be played on shore leave. When you're actually on active duty on a ship doing patrol, you don't really have time for gaming because you've got to be at action stations like that. When you're out at sea on patrol, that's a lot different to being on shore leave. Shore leave is when you get your back pay, and the gambling and the card games and the drinking takes place. The sleight of hand games of chance, definitely, because you're in a very confined space. You can't really do much physical, like play football, for example, because you're on a battleship. But again, when you're on patrol, you can see an enemy ship at any vessel at any time, especially in the age of sail, because piracy went on for about 3 centuries. So if you saw an unidentified ship, that could be a pirate ship. You got to sink it. So you could, be at, in the age of sail, you could see an enemy ship at any time. Same with, the age of steeled hull ships. In wartime, you can see an enemy ship at any time. When you're on operations, active duty, on any kind of active duty patrol, you are expecting, even if it's a peacetime patrol in neutral waters, you are still expecting to be at action stations for rescue or enemy or engaging enemy action. So that's where it's different. You have your shift routine. Reading is a big thing that sailors do. It's very interesting though, looking at the armed forces, because my father played football and rugby and athletics in the army, and for regiment in the army. and the armed forces do actually actively encourage their members to be involved in the army or navy or air force rugby teams, football, various sporting activities. They will encourage the regimental, the company, to have a boxing team, a football team, a cricket. They will actively encourage because it helps with the team building. So the armed forces and sports go hand in hand. And we've seen several ex-military go on to have distinguished careers in various sports. You look at rugby union, the Underwood brothers, RAF. So what do I think the effects will be if Bury go out of business? I will have a knock-on effect for all the other clubs in the Football League. Fans are saying, oh, well, it's 2 less fixtures to play. But actually, clubs would have budgeted in the off-season for the home and away games against Bury. Accrington Stanley, for example, have reported to be £100,000 lost because that game didn't go ahead. So it does have a knock-on impact to the other clubs on their revenues as well. It's not just Bury that are in trouble. It would actually affect other teams with their finances. But absolutely, it'd be a domino effect. I don't think what the full effects will be. We just don't know. Obviously, we've got just under 5.5 hours just about until Bury the deadline for the EFL. The EFL may extend the deadline. Apparently, according to sources, there are 4 interested parties interested in buying the club from Steve Dale. But Steve Dale should never have had the club in the first place. I've been reiterating this from the very beginning of the season. He should have never been allowed to buy that football club. He should not have been allowed to pass the fit and proper persons test. He bought the club for £1. This is what I've been getting at for a month, is he bought that football club for £1. That should not have been allowed in 2019. Ken Bates buying Chelsea back in the 80s for £1 and a pack of fags. That's then. We're talking about 2019, well, 2018 last season when he bought the club. But, the 21st century, 20 years into the 21st century almost, a football club should not be bought for £1. That's raising serious questions about the integrity of the EFL. And this is where the finger of blame gets pointed at the EFL for firstly allowing the club to go beyond its means because the financial fair play wasn't enforced. And then the fit and proper persons test not being enforced either. But we know that financial fair play is flawed and they cherry pick what clubs they're going to punish. And the fit and proper persons test, I could pass that. I could turn up and say, I'm buying Bury for £2. Literally. So governance has failed. And Ken Bates, he bought Chelsea for £1 and a pack of bench and edges in a pub not too far from Stamford Bridge. And look how much he sold it for. Ken Bates is one of the wealthiest men in football. Doesn't own a football club anymore. He's done his best to destroy Chelsea and he did his best to destroy Leeds United as well. I'm not a fan of Ken Bates. I never have been. I think he's a vile human being, but he made his money and he was pretty smart and he still has a vested interest in Chelsea and Leeds. But no, Ken Bates, he bought Chelsea for £1. That's whether it's actually true that he bought the club for £1 or not is, here nor there. But that was then. This is now. Steve Dale should not have been allowed. Dave Whelan, he bought Wigan dirt cheap. Dirt cheap. But the position Wigan Athletic were in when he bought them, they're not the club they became. But he sold them cheap as well. We only made 20 million off the sale of Wigan. So he didn't make a lot of money out selling them. But again, it does raise questions about, football ownership and what clubs are worth and the overinflation of player wages and the transfer market and a whole host of issues that, we have to discuss. We have to actively look at why, the EFL have basically been asleep on the watch for so long. The statement given this morning by the EFL in the news was laughable. Best way to describe it. Oh, we're really sad about this, and they're all just, disappointed. They should have done their job in the first place. Bolton would not be in the situation they're in, and neither would Bury, and a whole host of other clubs that have been failed by the fact that the EFL doesn't enforce its own rules, and when it does, it cherry picks. Same with the FA, same with the Premier League, same with UEFA, same with FIFA. They cherry pick what kind of punishments to give clubs. They cherry pick what kind of rules to enforce on clubs. And this is why fans are starting to get angry, not just here in the UK, but across Europe. They're getting more and more frustrated with governance, and I keep reiterating this. I mean, I love the questions, but we're coming back to the same topics we discussed yesterday and today. It's a recurring, you know. Oh yeah, like Jackie Walker with Blackburn. I mean, look, he bought the club because he was a local fan. The club was on its knees when he got involved. Crikey, 10 years before I was born, we almost fell out the Football League ourselves. We were broke as a Blackburn fan, and within 15 years, 16 years, we've won the Premier League. So we went from what is now the bottom of I think League One, the third division. We almost fell into the fourth division, and we almost fell out of the Football League entirely. And now the club's had 2 trophies since then. We've won the Premier League and the League Cup. Admittedly, we fell down to League One again, but we've got back the Championship. The thing is, the current owners, the Venki, should not have been allowed to buy that football club. They've been nothing but a disaster for 10 years, and I feel that again, the EFL and the Premier League as well, because they were a Premier League club at the time, haven't protected the integrity of the sport. They're just they're happy to take the money, and they don't ask questions where the money comes from. And then when a club is in trouble like Bury, then they go, "We want to see funds now. We want to see proof of funds." You weren't stopping him from buying the club for £1 6 months earlier, but now you want to see proof of funds. It's too late. Then he's bought the club. Steve Keane. This is where Steve Keane was an academy coach at Blackburn. He hadn't coached the first team, and the Venki started meddling. Was he a scapegoat? He wasn't a great manager to begin with, but at the same time, some of the managers that have followed him haven't done much better. In fact, they've done worse. But I think with how the club's been run over the last decade or so, I think Henningberg was a disaster. Appleton was a disaster. I think one season we had more managers than Chelsea had in 3 seasons, so that tells you something. But look, we've got Tony Mowbray at the moment. He's had a stabilising effect, and whether we can get back to the Premier League with Mowbray in charge, it'd be nice to make playoffs this year. Our form towards the end of last season was really good, but we had that dip in the middle of the season, which is a Blackburn thing to do, is to have that off patch in the season. And we went from the edge of the playoff places to the edge of the relegation places, and then our tail end form at the end of the season was brilliant. It was that round Christmas we had a massive dip in form. Was Steve Keane scapegoat? Well, if I'm honest, I think it's more the owners of the club haven't been great. Lots of debt, which is standard for the Championship now. Is your club's going to be ridden with debt, and the financial fair play is just not enforced. And if it was, at least 6-7 clubs in the Championship would be docked points before the season starts, as a given. And I think the EFL at this point, because it hasn't enforced the rules for so long and now cannot enforce the rules because so many clubs would fail the financial fair play rules. Same with the FA and the Premier League. The rules are there for a reason. The FA hasn't been enforcing them with the EFL and the Premier League, and they're trying to enforce them now. And that means about 30% of the clubs would automatically fail, and another 20%, I would think, would be close to failing. And so you're looking at only half the clubs would actually pass the financial fair play. I don't know. Bury have until midnight tonight. So from everything I've seen so far, it's not going to, if anything's going to be announced, it'll be this evening. I mean, they had to do it on a bank holiday weekend, of course, to really make everyone sweat. But the EFL have said they don't want Bury to be thrown out of the Football League. I'm surprised that this is where I think compulsory purchase of the club off Steve Dale by the governing body should be a thing. They should have that rule in place to stop unscrupulous criminals, basically. This is the best way I can describe what's happened to Bury and Bolton from doing what they're doing, so they can restructure the club's debts and make sure the club can survive, and they've got to find a suitable buyer. Of course, that's called thinking outside the box, and the EFL just, it seems to have a brain dead board. And from all I'm aware of, the clock's still ticking. We've got. I'm going to double check. I will double check. I didn't know about the Rangers having part of their stadium shut off because of the racist incident against Legia Warsaw. But as far as I know, Bury have until midnight tonight, or 1 minute to midnight, to basically sort out the issues that they have. Gareth Bale and Serena Williams. Oh, Serena Williams has got in the news because of that abuse she gave the umpire. Carlos Ramos will not umpire the Williams sisters at US Open. This is player power having an effect on officiating here. Carlos Ramos will not umpire any matches involving Serena or Venus Williams at this year's US Open. Now, this is the umpire that Serena Williams at last year's US Open had the tantrum against, which I thought was pretty childish. And I've had a discussion on Twitter today about her antics. The Portuguese umpire docked Serena Williams again for verbal abuse in last year's final against Naomi Osaka, who brought this is the final that brought Osaka to tears. Williams called a Ramos a liar and a thief, having allegedly received a point penalty for smashing a racket. Which, guess what? You smash a racket, you get. I like Venus Williams. Venus Williams always plays with I wouldn't say pride, but she plays with respect and she plays with grace. Serena doesn't. The 37-year-old was also handed a code violation for coaching. The US Open referee, who's the person in charge of all the umpires, Serene Freimel, oh God, what a name, says the decision is a good one for the tournament, the players and the umpires. We have selected the best officials for 2019, and there is some flexibility. It's not the first time that we've made decisions that is good for the tournament, is good for the players, and is good for the umpires as well to not be on those matches. In the end, our goal is to assign the best chair umpire for the right match. So in taking all those factors into consideration, the decision was made that he would not do any of the Williams sisters matches. Basically, he's been because the Williams sisters have got a lot of power here. This is player power. He can't officiate their games. I think that's BS personally. In heated exchanges in last year's final, Williams told Ramos, "You will never ever be on another court of mine as long as you live." So she's basically sort of cost him his job, which I think is wrong. He was well within his rights to dock her a point for smashing a racket and give her a court violation for coaching. He was well within his rights to do so. They're in the rule book. She didn't like it. She threw a paddy. But the US Open says the decision has been taken collectively and was not in response to a request from the Williams sisters. It is not unusual for umpires to be kept away from players after a contentious match. So there is precedent. The Brazilian Carlos Bernardes did not umpire Rafael Nadal for a significant period after a disagreement about time violations at a tournament in Rio de Janeiro in 2015. Ramos umpired this year's Australian Open semi-final between Kvitova and Collins, but had not been given a chance to add to his tally of 10 Grand Slam singles finals. Carlos has worked all the other Grand Slams. He has done Davis Cup, Fed Cup, and he's going to work the Davis Cup finals, which is considered still high of all profile matches. I think Serena Williams is basically bullied a guy, basically. And I think her antics last year, I had an argument with some guy who was basically subtly suggesting that I was racist and sexist because I thought Maria Sharapova is a drugs cheat, first up, and Serena Williams is a tantrum throwing bully who's had some real vile on-court antics. And apparently, I don't like powerful women. Apparently, no, I don't like bullies. The color of her skin's got nothing to do with it. And the fact that she's female has nothing to do with it. There are certain men's players I don't like either. I'm colorblind in this instance. This is why I hate racism. And her antics last year in the US Open, in the final, in her defeat, she's a bad loser. She may be one of the greatest champions in singles tennis there has ever been, men or women's. But her attitude stinks. And she's basically cost an umpire the chance of umpiring a high-profile match because it's her playing. That's a lack of respect for the sport, and it's a lack of respect for her opponent as well. And the officials. I think player power has prevailed where it shouldn't have, and I think there has been precedent in the past. She needs to know her place. She's near the end of her career now. She might not win another Grand Slam ever again to equal the record or break the record. But her sister Venus Williams plays with good grace and respect, And this is why I find them so different. I don't mind Venus Williams. She's battled through some serious health issues while playing, and has always conducted herself in exemplary fashion. Whereas Serena is a bully and is a bad loser, and is also a pretty arrogant winner as well. And her on-court antics are distasteful. I also have issue with a lot of the men's tennis players as well. A lot of them seem to take after McEnroe, if you know what I mean. Why am I streaming on just standard YouTube stream? I'm not on the YouTube Studio Beta because it just won't do it. I'm just on a standard live stream. I just got my new microphone, which is a Trust microphone. Putting it together was a bit of a pain in the ass. Lots of cabley bits, but it working. I mean, the headset. While I don't mind having the headset, it's uncomfortable to wear, and it's not as good as I would like it to be. My other headset I use for gaming on my Xbox, but I thought I would improve the quality of the set somewhat, and so I bought the microphone. We've still got to make some adjustments, but I thought as I'm live streaming, I'll use this. But I might still use the headset for normal videos. We did a video earlier on Evgeny Kuznetsov failing a drugs test for cocaine during the Ice Hockey World Championships in May, and I experimented with this. So I think I'll keep this for live stream and keep the headset for normal videos for now until we can work out a better setup with what I've got. But I'm still standard stream on standard YouTube as my live streams are. Murugusa and Lisicki, okay, everyone has their favourite players. For me, I don't really have a favourite player. I don't watch tennis as much as I used to. I will admit that. When I was younger, I used to watch tennis more. I did, but I don't watch it as much as I used to. It just has less interest for me now than what it did 10, 15 years ago. I think there are sports that I really am passionate about, and there are sports that I've fallen out of love with to a certain extent or don't enjoy as much. But 5 years down the line, it might be a different thing. But no, at the moment, I don't have a specific favourite player in tennis, and I haven't done for a while. I was a big Mark Philippoussis fan back in the day. Obviously, he's retired now. I liked Andre Agassi just because Andre Agassi, but he's had a lot of controversy, around him. There are Pat Cash, big fan of his, but again, it's the era that I grew up in. There were some real characters then. There's some characters now, like Nick Kyrgios. I don't know how he's not been suspended for some of his antics. If you think Serena Williams is bad, Nick Kyrgios is a disgrace. Not only to the Australian tennis and Australian sport, but to world tennis. And Nick Kyrgios, he's an absolute disgrace. And the tennis authorities need to really look long and hard about how they deal with him. If we're talking about players that I don't like, can't stand Nick Kyrgios. He really is a pathetic excuse of a sports star because he's not really a star. He's more famous for losing badly and some of his real pathetic. And Bernard Tomic as well. He's another one who I can't stand because he doesn't put 100%, 110%, and even in defeat, he'll just aimlessly play. Respect for other human beings is important. In the heat of battle, obviously, as we saw with Jofra Archer and Steve Smith with that bouncer in the second test, Jofra Archer may have not walked away from that when he bowled that ball in the best of ways. There was some bad images there, but I think he did his job. England obviously were targeting the Australian batting lineup with pace and bounce. It paid off. Had there not been as many rain delays, they would have won that second test. But, that's open for debate whether those are legitimate tactics in modern cricket. England do have issues with the batting lineup. They're reliant too much on Sam Curran is in the squad but isn't in the matchday team. He was instrumental last year against India. And they're too reliant on their lower middle order, which is the all-rounders basically, like Woakes, Stokes, Joss Buttler when he's on his game, but he's looking very tired, and Sam Curran. they're the ones coming in and getting England out of a mess. Joe Root shouldn't be captain. I never thought he's the right guy to be captain. But they haven't really solved the top order question since, I think, 2005. They've had issues with the top order for 14 years. They're not going away. It's not an overnight fix, but there's a couple of flashes of brilliance from a couple of them. Denley's not been too bad, but Jason Roy, no, not good enough. Joe Root, not good enough. Who do you bring in? Do you drop Bairstow and have Josh Butler as the specialist wicket keeper? Do you keep Bairstow in and jig around and put an all-rounder like Woakes or Sam Curran higher up the order, for example? Because they will go after the bowlers. Woakes and Curran, for example, will go after a bowling lineup. Sam Curran has no fear because he's young and just goes after it. I wouldn't say Cook was excellent. There was times in Cook's career where he was hopeless, and Strauss, I think, was overrated. I think Michael Vaughan was the best batsman captain we've had. Nasser Hussain, some of his views. When I read Nasser Hussain's articles in the newspapers and watch his interviews where he's slagging off the upper batsman and the captain, he never won an Ashes series as captain. He was embarrassing as England captain during an Ashes series because we lost all the time. But I think another problem is we don't have a number 3 because Joe Root bats at 4. But I wouldn't. If I was going to think outside the box, I would bring Sam Curran back in and rejig the batting order where I'll place Sam Curran higher up the order because he'll just go after the bowling. He'll attack it. And if that's some quick fire runs and makes the bowlers think and puts the bowlers under pressure, it takes some of the pressure off some of the other batsmen or batting lineup because you've got 11 batsmen, 11 fielders, and technically 11 bowlers. I see it as a team game. I don't see it just as batsman, bowler, all-rounder. I go, right, that's 11 men in the batting lineup because we've got some tail enders who can bat in world cricket these days. But if I'm looking at it, and I know I've got Sam Curran, who's probably angry at not being in this Ashes lineup at the moment, I'll bring him back in. Use that angry, youthful exuberance to go, sod it. He can go after the bowler. He will go after bowling. But that means you've got to drop someone. And I think you've got to look at Jason Roy and go, he's not good enough. And that means you're going to have to put Root in at 3. And then you're going to have to rejig the batting lineup from 4 to 11. But for me, I want an aggressive batsman who's got no fear. And Sam Curran as an all-rounder, while he's not the tallest all-rounder, and height can help with a batsman with especially all-rounders with power, he's an aggressive front foot batsman when he's batting. He will go after a bowler. He won't care if this guy's got 200 test wickets or it's his first test match. He will go after the bowling and he will hit them all round the ground for 4 and 6. He hasn't got that test century yet, but he's got a couple of 50s and he was instrumental last year in getting England over the line. And he also, with the ball in hand bowling, he took some crucial wickets as well because he has that bit of movement and he's a little bit slower. So you've got Archer bouncing him in, and then you can have Sam Curran with a slightly different style of bowling because he's shorter with a bit more swing and movement of the ball. And that's going to be a nightmare for a batting partnership. And Stuart Broad's being the lead bowler because Anderson's out. I think having younger bowlers around Stuart Broad, Woakes is brilliant. There's your 4 seamers. Bring a spinner in. Am I wrong? Have a lengthier tail. But you have to put one of those all-rounders higher on the order. But I think I don't think Stokes should always play. I really don't. I think Ben Stokes, he's because if you want to play them all the time, they're going to get knackered. Archer, he's very inexperienced at first class level, but he's showing in intense spells he can take wickets. You want to use Jofra Archer in short, sharp spells of aggressive bowling. And then you want to have players like Sam Curran or Chris Woakes to play longer spells. And then you want to have your Stuart Broads and your Jimmy Andersons. Jimmy Anderson's basically retired now. I don't think he comes back from his calf injury. But you want to have your spin bowler there, your spin option, and 4 seamers. That's how I would go. Maybe 5 seamers, a couple of all-rounders and a couple of specialist bowlers. I think we have too many all-rounders in the team, but I'll definitely have Woakes and Sam Curran. They are the most aggressive with the bat at the moment, and Woakes has got the best technique out of all the bat lineup, out of all 11. And Jofra Archer can bat a bit as well. He's an upper tail ender if you think about it from the order. But the top line, we're not getting the runs at the top of the order. And what seems England's plan is rely on the young and experienced kids who've got no fear to get us out of trouble. And you cannot continue doing that, because when they have that heavy defeat, and there will be a heavy defeat at some point where we lose by an innings and 100 runs, where we have to have a follow-on, that's going to dent Sam Curran and Archer's confidence. But while they've been in the team, while they've been playing, England's got a good record. You take them out, the record isn't as good. So that's my opinion on those guys and why I'd have them in the team. They bring youthful exuberance and a lack of fear. And I'm seeing a lot of fear in that batting lineup. But Stokes, I have an opinion on Ben Stokes. I think he was very lucky not to go to prison. And I think he's a very lucky boy to still be part of the England setup, because clearly there's an issue with drink there and he's got a temper on him outside the game. Alex Hales, there's cocaine there. That's why he's not in the side right now. So there are a couple of players who really do have some off-field issues, and Ben Stokes is one of them. But that's just me. I mean, I'm just saying a point. Oh, we got someone from Adelaide. Good day, Mr. Zier. Good day, mate. My best Australian impersonation. I'm only going to be on for another 10 or so minutes because the cricket highlights are on at 7 and I would like to watch them. And I've got to take my lovely medication for my kidney infection. Yeah, I've been unwell this week, so I'll be, knackered and at work. But it's great to see people from around the world. Yesterday we had viewers from Canada, and today we've got viewers from Australia. We've had people on live stream from New Zealand, South Africa. I've had someone from Vietnam once. Yes, I had technically an Australian living in Vietnam, but I had someone who lived in Vietnam watch. I've had people from Spain, Holland, Germany, Scandinavia. I get viewers from all over the world. So you're welcome to join the live stream. If you've got any questions, get them in quick, because I'm only going to spend another 5-10 minutes before I end this live stream and watch the cricket highlights, because I want to see obviously what happened in today's session. But I think, there are issues with England's top order. No doubt on that. I think there are massive problems, and that's down to the selectors and the coach. I'm watching the Challenge Cup final tomorrow, and I will try and catch some of the Rugby Union as well. But the Challenge Cup is what I really want to watch, because St Helens Warrington, that's a grudge match and a half, that is. Aussie rules. I watch it every now and then. I played it at school a little bit due to some of our Australian gap year students. I think there are issues with the AFL. It could do better in selling itself abroad. But in Australia, it's the dominant code over the NRL. It's won hearts and minds in that respect. But there are still things that they could improve upon. But I think part of that's to do with the selling the game overseas. But domestically, they've won the battle between rugby league and Australian rules football. Do I enjoy watching it? Absolutely. I'm probably one of the few Brits who actually understands what's going on with the men wearing tank tops and hot pants. But I do miss the fact that they've tried to take the fighting out of it a little bit. Same with rugby league. I think that added a bit of spice to a rivalry. Let's say Essendon versus Richmond, for example. A good old biff in that wouldn't be amiss. But obviously, the big story that I've followed on AFL on this channel is the peptide scandal at Essendon. And I've been asked by one of my Australian subscribers to do another video on Essendon and the history of Essendon. The peptide scandal really damaged the image of the AFL. And it also involved the NRL as well, with Cronulla and Penrith and Canberra and a few other clubs got sucked into that Stephen Dank peptide scandal. It's still having repercussions to this day. I think so. I would look into the history of Essendon. I think I'll look into the history of all the AFL teams, to be honest. I've got to do some more videos on the AFL. I haven't done as many as I would like, but I haven't watched as many games the last couple of years. A couple of years ago when the channel first started, I was watching a lot of AFL. In the last 2 years, I haven't watched as much. So I'll have to catch the end of this season, and then I'm going to have to start doing the club histories when the AFL season ends. I'll get on with the club histories and look at some of the key moments, including the peptide scandal and how much of an impact that had on the image overseas of what the AFL is, and domestically. It had a massive impact on the AFL's image and raised a lot of questions about doping regimes, anti-doping rules, drugs testing of athletes. So that's an interesting one. But also the Ben Cousins and the issues he had off the field. I watched his documentary. Obviously, it came out in 2010, the Ben Cousins story. Really interesting that before he was even a professional AFL player, he had a drug addiction. And the team failed him, the AFA failed him, but he also failed himself. But the fact that, Richmond gave him a second chance and then he ended up back in prison, it's a sad tale, but again, it does highlight an issue that I think Australian sport seems to have, and I think a lot of sports seem to have, is recreational drug abuse. The reason why I'm wearing my ice hockey jersey, the Washington Capitals, is the Washington Capitals NHL player has been banned for 4 years today from international IIHF competition for cocaine use. And recreational drug use in professional sports is a big concern that I think a lot of sports aren't taking seriously enough and not working hard enough to eradicate or solve. And it's something that's a big debating point. Well, there's allegations against this particular player in the past about cocaine use. There was a video online about of Kuznetsov. That's his name, Evgeny Kuznetsov. He's a Russian. Last year, when Washington Capitals, this team, were playing the Vegas Golden Knights in Vegas, there's a video of him in a hotel room with a large amount of white powder on a table, neatly lined up, and a woman who's not wearing a lot of clothing, who's not his wife. So yeah, make of that what you will. But I've got to do some more AFL videos, and I really do. But I do like Aussie Rules. I've played it a few times, and I also, when I was playing rugby, we had Aussie Rules training sessions to work on our kicking skills. So it did improve my kicking from hand playing rugby union. The Aussie Rules training sessions we had. It's a lot harder, even on a small little rugby pitch, to play AFL than I realised. It is much harder than I thought it would be. It's a very difficult sport to play. And a lot of people do find it very confusing, don't understand it, but it's actually a very simple sport to play, but also very difficult. The rules are very simple, but it's actually very difficult to play it. What team do you support? And that'll be on my, and I'll love if you could answer what team you support. I'll be very interested to see what team you follow in the AFL. Because I've got a few Australian subscribers who are big AFL and NRL fans, so it'd be interesting to see what team you follow in Adelaide. I'm going for Port Adelaide as a guess, and I'm probably wrong because it's probably Adelaide, but if it's Port Adelaide, that's okay, I guess. I prefer the West Coast Eagles for my sins if I do follow a team. But I'll be interested to see what team you support as you're from Adelaide. It would be really interesting to see. But I think the AFL, it's a fun sport to watch, and I do have to do more videos, and I will do some videos over this weekend. North Adelaide, excellent. Got it right. Right, in that case, now that I've got some video ideas for the AFL to do, and some more things to discuss, and it's very interesting, the cricket conversation, because the highlights start in 5 minutes. I'm going to call this a day. Thank you very much for all your questions. I really appreciate the discussions we've had on a variety of topics. Yesterday we got the CFL into a live stream, and today we've got the AFL into a live stream. So two leagues of two sports that are very unique in the sense that they're only played in one country. Canadian football is a variant of North American football, which is only played in Canada, and Aussie Rules is only played, obviously, in Australia. So I've got to do some videos on the old AFL and CFL. So that's something that I will have to get prepping on the old whiteboard, which is down there behind my cabinet. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I appreciate all your questions, and feel free to check out all my content that we have posted so far in the channel's history. Look at any playlists you want, and feel free to leave comments on videos, and of course get your friends to watch and subscribe as well, because that helps with the growth of the channel. And I appreciate everyone who's taken part in tonight's live stream. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now. End the stream, please. Bye, guys.